Hello and welcome to Gin with Gwyn. I'm Oliver Gwyn, and this is where we talk about philosophy, marketing, and this week, data, in particular, Big Data London, which is what this virtual background is behind me. So I'm going to give you my personal, doesn't represent the company I work for, hot takes on the event, and as well as featuring my pins and some of the vendors there. I'm only going to feature the vendors or tools that I've actually worked with. I'm not going to talk about absolutely everybody. First of all, if you've not been to Big Data London before, I would highly recommend it. It's probably the number one show in the UK. It's really, really busy. You actually have to queue to get into some of these things. And you can meet and talk to some really interesting people, get diverse opinions and stuff. So I find it useful every single year. I've only been 2 years, but I find it really useful. This year was a lot less salesy than the first year I went, which is good, more informative. So I felt like I got more out of it. What are the themes that I saw? I'm gonna have to talk about AI, aren't I? Most of the data people I spoke to are kind of sick of hearing about AI. All of the vendors had, of course, added some sort of AI strapline to their stand or their marketing material, and I'm not sure how true that was for most of them. But Josh Cunningham of Lloyd's Banking Group did a really, really good talk. I found it very interesting about data culture at scale. And I asked him afterwards, sort of, how do you deal with the people who are not interested in data, that don't want to get on board that journey at all? And he was saying that actually AI has been a great catalyst. So a lot of stakeholders that had not wanted to show up to these sort of central data events that he was organizing suddenly became interested when they were like, oh, what's the AI implication for their job? What's the AI going to impact them? And suddenly they wanted to find that data because of that. So he said that AI has been really good from that point of view. And I would say that's definitely true of clients that I've been speaking to and prospective clients where they're interested in AI and then they just don't have the data in place. And so you have to sort of sell them a longer journey. But AI seems to be very much continuing the digital transformation journey that the pandemic sort of started. Nearly all of the vendors had added a talking feature or like a chat feature to their tool. So like where you can be like, hey, how many customers did I have this month? And it will give you an answer, which seems like a good idea, but is actually a terrible idea because all of those tools work in silos. Most of them don't have your entire data stack in there. They certainly won't have all of the data tools in there. And so what you're going to get on a massive level is like 12 different versions of the truth because of that. And where it used to be that somebody was getting that because they were looking inside specific tools, that hasn't changed. Just because you've added this talking feature doesn't mean that the data will be collected and in a centralized place. So that's going to be a huge, huge problem. And it's going to lead to people worrying about data quality. So a lot of people mentioned to me that data quality is sort of having a moment because of AI and because of all this kind of stuff, and people are worrying about data quality. But the problem that a lot of people were speaking to me about was that their bosses are aiming for like 98%, 100% accuracy on every number, which of course makes sense. But that can't always be delivered because it might not be available. It might not have the regularity that they wanted. And so it's a little bit of a frustration from them where, of course, we'd all like 100% data to be available and regular and accurate all the time, but it's not always possible. And weirdly, it's sometimes better to be consistently wrong than it is to be 100% right, because the cost and time associated with getting something 100% right in a world that's ever changing is very, very difficult. So those were the main themes I got from the shows. The last one to just talk about was my good friend Anusha at EY did a fantastic talk about data governance, which I think sort of underlines all of these things, specifically talking about sort of the risks that are ahead at every single stage of the data process, when you're collecting data, when you're storing data. And one of the key things that she talked about was this concept of dark data. So everybody in every organization, there's always somebody who's storing data somewhere that is not obvious to everybody else, and they have a spreadsheet sometimes on their own desktop, and that can be very bad when you have a leak. And it's really difficult to find those people and get that information out of them because sometimes they're just keeping a spreadsheet for their own reporting or for their own job. But it has a huge risk associated with it. So I thought that was a really good talk and something we should all be bearing in mind. Now let's move on to some hot takes about people who are exhibiting. So let's start with Microsoft Azure. Now, I quite like Microsoft Azure in itself, But what I don't really like with Microsoft is they have this thing called Fabric, which you might be familiar with. It's like a suite of tools and it does like literally everything. They've got a tool for modeling, they've got a tool for visualization, they've got a tool for extraction. And if you look back over the last 10 years on the product roadmap for these tools, you'll see it changes quite frequently. Like every 2 years, it changes quite significantly, where suddenly they've got 4 tools, then they've got 6 tools, and this tool has now become this, and so on and so forth. And that's bad in my opinion because there's not a lot of stability on those tools. If your team are trained on a particular tool and it's changing all the time, okay, tools do change. But with Microsoft, I do feel like it's changing quite often, so that you're then having to spend more time on training. You're not getting value in the interim whenever it changes, which you don't have control over. I think some of those tools are not the best tools in those categories for those things. My example would be Azure Data Factory. It's got like a drag and drop interface on it for modeling. And people, the selling point of that is, hey, you don't need to be technical, you don't need to do code, and you can still do modeling. But you should know code if you're going to do modeling. You should be doing those things in code. You shouldn't be doing them if they're anything complicated at all. It's very likely something's going to go wrong. So I really don't like Azure Data Factory. It makes it very difficult for people to work in teams as well. So Fabric, last point is that reason I don't really like it is because it's very expensive. I think it's £5 grand a month and up. So you can very easily replace those tools with a suite of tools, a composable stack, and then you're not tied into Microsoft. I do think that the reason that people go for Microsoft is just it's a name that people trust, and maybe they're already using Microsoft for everything else, so they just want one bill, and it's easy from that point of view. And I'm not saying that all those tools are bad, but what I'm saying is it changes quite a lot. The other argument that people like Microsoft, they go for Microsoft, is that it's easy to find people with qualifications. But my counterpoint to that is because Microsoft have so many certifications out there, there's a lot of people on the market who have the certifications, but not necessarily years of experience using those tools because they're changing the tool so often. So those are some hot thoughts on Microsoft Azure and Fabric. Next on our tour is DBT. DBT is a tool for modeling, and I would say it's the gold standard, and it's the only tool that I would recommend for modeling. There's not really many alternatives, to be honest. What a lot of other tool providers have done, like your visualization tools and sometimes your extraction tools, is they've tried to put modeling in there. Um, I always advise never use that, especially for visualization tools. The number one reason that your dashboards are loading slow or maybe they're not working is normally because you're using the modeling within those tools. They're just not really meant for that. So DBT, we love it. It's the best thing ever. Just use DBT. What else can you use, really? It's the number one, and also it's free if you're using the open source version. So why not? The next tool that we have is, see underneath my head there, Amplitude. So Amplitude is a tracking tool. It's more on the product side. It's interesting to see them exhibiting. This is the second year actually that they've exhibited, or that I've seen them at Big Data London. These two ladies were very useful in answering my questions and what's the updates there. So thanks to those guys. I like Amplitude. I think it's pretty good. I think it's probably a cheaper alternative to things like Segment, which can get really, really expensive at scale. Got some nice features on there. They were saying that they've just added session replay. So not only can you see the data en masse in terms of what people have done and actions that they've taken, you can go and replay the sessions and actually see that for yourself. So you've got a nice mix of quant and qual. What is Amplitude missing? Well, the thing that we mostly do with Amplitude is it's like a data source for us. So it doesn't necessarily have your customer information in there, your LTV plays, all of that kind of stuff. And so if you've got that in your database, you can mix the reporting in here with that. And then not only do you have like, what are people doing on this particular web page, you can then separate it out by, hey, what are my most valuable customers doing on here versus the people who are only paying the free subscription or whatever it might be. So yeah, Amplitude is a pretty good tool. They were saying they're going to add in some heat mapping in there. The reporting in there, if you're using it as a standalone tool, is pretty good, but I would mix it in with the data in your CRM system or in your backend database or wherever it might be, just to give you that fuller picture, because there's a lot of gains in doing so. If you need help with that, reach out. Next, we have Fivetran, which is definitely 2 better than 3tran. It's an extraction tool. It gets the data from your data source into a lakehouse or a warehouse. Apparently, like 84% of companies, they create custom extractors and they don't use things like Fivetran. The reason being that it's free to create custom extractors. It only costs your time. And in a lot of cases, if it's a niche data source, maybe you cannot extract the data, and so you need to build something yourself. But is it free? No, it's not really free because it takes time. And the number one problem that you've got is, let's say you are creating an extractor from Facebook. Facebook at any moment, on any day, at any time, could change their API, could change the way that they're doing the reporting, and suddenly what you've built will break. This used to be a bit of a problem for us because we built a lot of custom extractors, and whenever one data source would update, we'd have to update like 20 different clients in the same day, and it used to be a bit of a headache. So then you have this sort of firefighting sort of element to maintenance that your team are going to have to do. It might get in the way of more strategic projects which might need to be delivered. You might be working on something really important and suddenly your data source breaks, and that is the advantage in using something like Fivetran, in that they're the ones that have to be up at 1 o'clock in the morning updating the data source because Facebook have decided to update. They have the largest collection of connectors and probably the best quality of that. So always look there first, and then if you need to build something, you can build it off the back of that. I don't think we have a single client where we haven't had to build like one or two extractors, but we always look at Fivetran first because it's easier. They're doing the upkeep, and also their pricing did come down in the last couple of years. It used to be, and I know a lot of people said this to me at the time, it used to be very expensive. But if you've not looked recently, maybe have a look again because, yeah, the price has come down a little bit. They had a bit of competition there, so that's good. But certainly consider this before you consider custom extraction, which has ongoing and probably higher maintenance cost, I would say, overall. Next, we have Airbyte, which is another extraction tool. Similar to Fivetran, does the same sort of job as that. One thing I like about AirTran is that they grade the connections, so you can see what they consider to be like really robust versus something that's just in beta or it's not quite ready for the public consumption yet. Definitely has less connectors than Fivetran, more of a fiddly tool, to be honest with you. It is a tool that we use, and it's a tool that has a level of customizableness, if that's a word, associated with it, so it can be good in certain scenarios. But it's probably a tool I personally like less than Fivetran, because it is a bit more fiddly. It's harder to work with. It's not always so easy to orchestrate with as well. So Airbyte is certainly an option, but it's not always the option I would go with. Next, we have Click, or as I insist on calling it, Qlik, because I'm pretty sure that's how that's pronounced. ClickSense is a decent visualization tool, pretty solid, easy to get started with. Doesn't handle large data sets particularly well. I think it's more of a starter tool than it is something that would scale particularly well. Click have tried to add in a load of like extraction methods, and they're trying to expand to sort of a all-in-one type of tool, and I just don't really like that at this moment. I understand that there's probably too many tools on the market, and then we're going to start to see a collaboration where a couple of tools are going to start to do a lot of things very well, but I don't think Click is one of those tools at this moment in time. I think most visualization tools, visualization is quite a specialist area. Interestingly, one of the themes was people were saying, what about using Gen AI for visualization? And I'm like, what's wrong with the dashboard? I don't know. So yeah, Click it's a decent tool if you're just getting started with data, but I'm not sure I'd recommend it for if you want to scale. It's certainly not in our wheelhouse of visualization tools that I would go to. So it's okay, but it's not amazing. Next, we have, I'm going over this way, Databricks. So Databricks is really, really customizationable as a platform. It's kind of like building your own engine in a way, in that you can get it to do whatever you want it to do. And for this reason, there's quite a lot of like enterprise level clients, maybe in the financial services sector, where it makes a lot of sense to go down that route where you can really get the data that you want in the way that you want to, especially if you've got streaming considerations, maybe something in the medical field. But if you are not particularly mature in your data journey, maybe you're just doing internal reporting to begin with and some activation, probably wouldn't go with Databricks. It's quite expensive as an option. It's probably the most expensive option. And you really need an internal team that know the ins and outs of Databricks in order to work with it on a day-to-day basis. And because it's a little bit of a newer tool, there's less of those people out there, which means that they're generally more expensive. So Databricks can be a really good tool, but I wouldn't really recommend it to most of the people who are probably watching this. Next, we have, which way am I going to go? This way. Rudderstack. I like to thank this chap here because he answered my questions. So Rudderstack was apparently originally started as a CDP in competition with like Segment and Particle. CDP is a customer data platform. And now they seem to be doing more stuff around sort of extraction and activation and segmentation and that kind of stuff. So they're more in the reverse ETL sort of space. That marketing message has changed over the last couple of years, and it confused me a little bit. I have worked with Rudderstack a little bit, not loads, which is the reason I wanted to go and speak to them. When I worked with it, it was a little bit complicated to use. I don't think it's as easy as just using like a 5-tran to extract and then using a census or high touch to reverse ETL. So I can't really say much more on that. I've only used it on the one project, but it was a little bit complicated to use. Maybe it's improved in that time. I've not used it in the last sort of 2 years. So that's what my thoughts are on Rudderstack at this moment. I think CDPs are going to die, to be honest, because I think if anybody is interested in AI, and most companies are, the first thing they need to do is concentrate on centralization of tools. And CDPs typically create another silo. So everybody else in the organization is using a data stack to get all the facts from. And then you have a CDP, which creates a silo for the marketing team typically. And Rudderstack, their sort of sales point is that they're going to use the same data that's on the warehouse to do all the CDP stuff. But if you can do that, then why not just do that composably? Do you need Rudderstack to do that? I'm not sure you do. There's a few tools that you're already using that can do that job. So I'm not really certain that I see what the selling point is of Rudderstack at this moment in time. But maybe you want to consider it if you are having trouble activating data in particular. Next, we have Snowflake. So Snowflake is one of the 3 main options you've got for it's a lake house, but for storing your data, basically, that's what it's for. And Snowflake has the advantage that it has lake house abilities, which means that you can store structured data, but you can also store unstructured data. Now, a lot of companies that I'm speaking to, they say that they definitely need the lake capabilities for the unstructured data, that they might have sort of ad hoc data sources that are going to come in and they don't want to spend the time cleaning them, or they're going to do that afterwards. And so they really, really need the lake. But the lake can get super expensive, and I'm always like, do you need that? Is that something you need, really? I'm not sure that I really believe you that there's going to be a real life scenario in which something is so urgent that you can't go through the stage of extracting it. Maybe that happens, but maybe you can just store the data and then come look at it, and okay, it's unstructured, but you could still probably just store. You don't need to put it in the lake necessarily to begin with. And certainly I'm not a fan of using the lake for analysis. I know a lot of people are, but I personally think that you should always go through the point of structuring and modeling data. I know it takes time and it's an effort and you've got to define things, but if you're not willing to go through that effort, then why are you extracting that data? It can't be that useful. For me, it's sort of a litmus test of what should you be inputting on there. I do like Snowflake, but nearly every time I've worked on a Snowflake project, people are wasting loads of money. Snowflake kind of encourages bad behavior because on the lower tiers, you can just copy your data loads of times. It doesn't really matter. You can format it in the wrong way, and it's not going to cost you anything extra. And then as you scale, suddenly that Snowflake bill gets really, really big. And most of the projects that we've worked on where somebody already has Snowflakes, we've been able to save them like thousands of pounds by structuring things the right way, basically. So Snowflake is a good tool, but you've got to really know how to use it and make sure you're dealing with somebody who has years of experience in structuring that data on the data engineering side, because it can make a huge impact on the bottom line, especially how you load that data from Snowflake. And be careful of that unstructured data and ask yourself if you really need it. If you are on Snowflake today and you have a very high bill, maybe reach out, because I'm sure we can get that lower for you. And there we have it. Those are some Heart off the top of my head, thoughts about Big Data London and some of the vendors that I went to visit. I did go and visit nearly everybody, but I didn't have time to fit you all into a video, I'm afraid. And the problem that I have, and bear in mind this is kind of my job, there's too many tools. Every year I'm like, oh, here's like 20 tools I never heard of before. It's really difficult to keep on top of those. And even though we use a multiple tools for multiple clients and multiple scenarios, so we probably use more tools than most people being an agency. I I can't imagine if I was like a head of data and I'm thinking about changing my tools and I go to this show because everybody's promising the same thing. They're all saying they could do every single part of the pipeline perfectly. And unless you're like me and you're using these things day to day, you don't really know what the difference is. They all make a lot of promises, which means that you then spend a lot of time in demos, speaking to people, all this kind of thing to make the right option. The pricing is difficult because it's all depending and bespoke on you and your data volumes normally. And so it's really difficult if you're like a standalone data person to know which is the best tool to use. So if you have um, niche use cases, or if you're thinking about changing, get in touch with 173 Tech, because as well as my top level thoughts here, we can give you a bespoke recommendation depending on what is most relevant to you and most importantly, what is going to scale. Thanks very much for joining me, and thanks to all the people I spoke to at Big Data London for answering my normally quite niche questions and all the presentations that I saw. Hope to see you next week for some more Gin with Gwyn.